welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Monica, it's a pleasure to have you back on the show. We've talked about JFK, we've talked about Michael Jackson. I've actually tried to reach out to more people that look into Michael Jackson. Surprisingly, there's not that many individuals besides like biographers or someone who knew him at a point. But we're here to talk about the JFK assassination again, and you finally got into the assassination aspect. What happened? What changed your mind?
Um, so I don't like it was very difficult to look into it, I'll be honest, because I'm not the kind of person like I hate true crime series on TV. They freak me out. Like I can't sleep at night after I watch them. I don't want, I don't enjoy studying crime, and especially crime of someone I admire, and I greatly admire JFK. But at the same time, knowing so much about his presidency and understanding so much about what was lost when he died, both in the immediate term and in the long term. And, I think you can argue that literally millions of people died because of his assassination, from Vietnam to Indonesia to later in the Congo to, I would argue, in Gaza today. So you really have all these long term, decades long repercussions from his assassination. And it was really difficult to sort of understand that and to be like, no, I don't want to look at the assassination at all. I don't want to deal with it because it is an uncomfortable topic for me for a lot of reasons. One is just I don't like studying crime, period. So it was very difficult to go. Like when I wrote the first book, I was up late at night. I was excited. I was inspired. I really enjoyed it. Whereas this was more like just a sense of duty of like, I really want this man to get justice. And so I'm going to try to, read through all these books and analyze all these books, and read through these various testimonies and just try to put the puzzle pieces together. And the other thing I wanted to do is sort of go from beginning to end very logistically, because I'm a very like logistics person. To pull something like this off requires a tremendous amount of logistics. So I was trying to figure out what are all those sort of touch points? If it went wrong here or there, the assassination would not have happened, or at least not in Dealey Plaza. And so I was trying to find out, like, logistically from beginning to end, how could this thing have happened or how did it happen? And another thing I wanted to do is not argue any thesis, because I felt like every book I read started with this is what happened, and now I'm going to argue the case. Whereas I kind of wanted to go bottom up and just say, here's his policies, here's in general who benefited from this crime, and there are various interests and areas that benefited from the crime. And then here's like bottom up on the ground, here's what I can see that happened. And then I don't come to any conclusion in the book, but I try to sort of let people kind of link those on the ground players as best they can to the entities that benefited from the crime and try to kind of put the puzzle pieces together, because we only have some of the puzzle pieces, we don't have every puzzle piece, but I think we have enough that we can try to make some sense of it. And so that's kind of what I was trying to do, is sort of go bottom up, not just kind of start at blank zero or point one or whatever and just try to figure out what happened. And really I wrote it for JFK, and for, us as a whole, because we all kind of suffered and continue to suffer as a result of his assassination.
Yeah, I want to ask you about who the who benefited part. Who did you narrow down specifically in your mind? I'm not saying you can have to shout out a conclusion or anything, but there's a lot of names that get mentioned about people who might have been behind the assassination. And in my honest opinion, I do appreciate and I do care about the JFK, his not only his life but also the assassination part. But a lot of people benefited. It's not just a specific person, group, and the people that did not look into the case or investigate, they kind of just did what they already felt about JFK anyway. Like they already didn't like JFK, so then they just continued not liking JFK and bothered to do a crappy job on his investigation or the assassination aspect of it. Whether we can say that's conspiratorial will be speculation. I think for me, I've kind of gone back through listening to what I can source and what I can find audio or video wise, and just trying to, I'm a little not less conspiratorial, but I'm a little bit more, I think this might have been it rather than this. Like Connolly, there's a lot of stuff in the assassination we'll talk about that gets covered, and you ask people where a source for it is, and there's like nothing. It's kind of just like lore throughout the community. So I'm curious, who were you able to kind of start to focus on, or who were some names of some people you looked at that really benefited after the assassination?
Okay, so I looked at interests more so than names. Like the names, I go through a lot of names in terms of on the ground who was involved. But my first chapter is Cui Bono. And I kind of separated it into five interests, which are anti-communist interests, pro-war interests, CIA interests, Israeli Zionist interests, and then powerful financial interests. And I also mentioned Lyndon Johnson because I feel like people often forget he also was a major beneficiary of the assassination, because it is very doubtful he would have ever become president had Kennedy not been assassinated. And it's also questionable whether he would have been on the ticket in 1964. So he was obviously a major beneficiary as well. And I also kind of make clear that there's a lot of overlap between these interests. A lot of players are committed to multiple of these matters, not just one or the other. But these are in general, like from a geopolitical perspective or from a political financial perspective, these are the broad interests that benefited from the assassination, is kind of where I started with.
Now, did you examine, like, if we take LBJ, for example, he benefited, became president, all the scandals of the Bobby Baker stuff drops, but then you have the counter to it, which is he spent the first couple of years of his administration dealing with issues relating to the JFK assassination, the whole political aftermath, the press stories, the reporting, Manchester's book later, and so much where, I looked at Vietnam differently. I've had historians on about it and kind of looking at it. I think he was fed wrong information and he just didn't pay attention to it because all he wanted to care about was being a president that was in the domestic United States. Everything else was he didn't bother to look into. He wanted the media, he wanted all that type of stuff, and that's another problem. But he never cared about like foreign policy as much as JFK did. But the whole assassination thing, like I said, there's a large amount of people that believe LBJ was like the guy because he became president, he did Vietnam, and again, that's saying that's not necessarily accurate. We have a lot of people on record now, like McNamara, Mansfield, and so many others that have admitted that they gave Johnson wrong information or McNamara calculated the numbers wrong. So I'm curious when it comes to like LBJ and you come across these names of people that shout their own theories, what's one you really kind of side with compared to what's one maybe you might not side with so much?
I don't really take a position. I think it's important to look at all the evidence and put everything on the table and then try to put it together. And so I want people to kind of read the book with an open mind and sort of come to their own conclusions. Like I don't want to push a particular view over another view. Um, I would say though that I think there's evidence that points to perhaps LBJ had some involvement. I think it's probably a stretch to argue that he was the mastermind, but that's just like my personal opinion, and that's just based on the evidence I came across. But I don't really have a particular view or want to promote a particular view because I think we really just I think that happens way too much in the research community in a lot of ways, and so people don't include evidence that doesn't support their thesis, whereas I just want to put every piece of evidence on the table, whether it points to LBJ, whether it doesn't point to LBJ, whoever it points to. I think it all needs to be on the table, and then we need to figure out like, who could these players have been working for, how did this thing happen, all things of that nature. So um, I don't rule out anyone as a suspect. I think, you know, I think I think to rule out anyone as a suspect is not fair to JFK in a lot of ways, especially if there's evidence, even if there's not a ton of evidence, if there's some evidence that points to a particular interest, like there is some evidence that points to LBJ. So I would not rule him out as a suspect. I don't think there's massive evidence that points to him, but there is some degree of evidence. So I would never rule him out.
I'm with you on that. I was just curious because, like I said, a lot of people have their own theories on things. But where did you go for resources when you were looking to dive into the assassination? Like, what's besides looking at the people that benefited? Where would you aim when you're looking at because you have a lot of things. You have Jack Ruby, you have the whole Dallas trip in general, you have Lee Harvey Oswald, you have any other things that really follow evidence manipulation. I've always stood in the kind of ground when it comes to Oswald is that a lot of stuff looked like it was fabricated by the Dallas police after the fact of when Oswald was killed. So I'm curious, what was your next step, but also where did you get your resources from or starting base?
So I started with all the books that have been written over the years. And I actually started with Mark Lane's book because
Oh
I
yeah.
wanted to understand what actually, just from the very, very beginning, what were the initial questions that people asked about the crime. And I think his book was great also in the sense that it convinced me there was something amiss. You know what I mean? That there were a lot of unanswered questions. And so I wanted to start, I kind of started at the highest level at first in the sense of like, okay, geopolitically, who benefited? And then I went to the very lowest level and was like, okay, what happened in Dallas that day? Like, first, I wanted to be convinced that there was a conspiracy because just because entities benefited from it doesn't mean that Oswald couldn't have shot him as a lone gunman. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And so then I went to Mark Lane's book and I read that and I was like, yeah, there's something amiss here. There's definitely reasons to question this crime. And I read, Sylvia Meagher's book. I think that was her name, and kind of
Accessories
those
after the
early
fact.
books. Yeah, those first few books in the '60s, they were very good in terms of what happened that day in Dallas. They didn't really go beyond that at that point yet. And then I sort of read all the other assassination books, and I tried to read all the ones that argued different theses and different arguments. And that's kind of when I noticed that, like, oh, wait, this book excludes that info, and that book excludes that info. And I was like, and it's only human nature. If you're going to argue that so and so is behind the assassination, it's human nature to focus on the info that supports your thesis and not focus on the other info. And so that's why I was kind of like, well, let me just kind of collate this all together and try to really summarize, what are the key touch points? Let's just logistically, how does it look like this thing happened? And then I went, after I read those books, I went into like a lot of the Warren Commission testimony, the HSCA testimony. For Dallas, actually, I relied a bit on the JFK Library because I wrote the book in chronological order. And as I got finished with New Orleans, I was like, okay, great, Oswald's in the TSBD, but how the hell did they get the motorcade past the TSBD? So the first thing that came up is like, where did the luncheon site come from? And I'd always assumed in all the books I'd read that the luncheon site was set before Oswald was put in the TSBD, but that is not the case at all. And that's what I realized when I was going through the JFK library, I found the notes of Bruno, which is JFK's advance man, and the first thing they had on there was lunch at the Hilton. I was like, I'm like, am I looking at the right thing? I was really confused at first. I was like, where the hell is this trademark, right? I don't see this. And so I kept reading and reading through his notes. And then I found out, like, well, the Bottlers Convention booked out the Hilton. They asked them if they could have it. They said, no, you can't have the Hilton, or we were not willing to share it. So Bruno then got hung up in this place called the Women's Building, and they actually chose the Women's Building. The Secret Service approved it, the White House approved it, and it was all set to go all the way until November 15th. And then it was actually Governor Connolly who was moaning and moaning and moaning and complaining and saying, "I don't want to if you're not coming to the trademark, don't even bother coming to Dallas." And that's when it kind of occurred to me is like, maybe people ignore this part of the story because and you could argue it promotes the lone nut thesis, because obviously Connolly is not a witting participant in this. He got shot. There's no way, there's not even a thought in my mind that he wittingly put himself in a situation to get shot. I don't think anyone would do that. And so, but I think you can raise the question of, did someone get into Connolly's ear? Maybe a benefactor of his, maybe someone who was working with him, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I think it's very, very important to understand is because if Connolly had not done that, JFK would not have been assassinated. That's just a fact, or at least not in Dealey Plaza, right? Maybe he would have been maybe there was some other patsy waiting somewhere else, but certainly he would not have been assassinated in Dealey Plaza. And so if you're going to argue the thesis that there was a conspiracy to murder JFK, you have to believe that someone manipulated Connolly. Like, you can't not believe that because they're not going to chance that. You know what I mean? They're going to try to manipulate and get the location they want so that they can get the route that they want. And so that's when I was really like, I just want to lay everything on the table. I don't know what it means, but I know it's important because I know the assassination would not have happened without it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so if anything I say, I can pull up with clip. I have the HSCA audio all transcribed into short YouTube clips and everything. And one thing was Stuart B. McKinney, which is what you just mentioned, asked John Connolly about the Women's Building or the trademark. And there was a conversation or argument, little spat, he calls it, between Hal Bruno and, no, it's Jerry Bruno, I think. Jerry Bruno.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jerry Bruno, because he corrects himself. He says Hal Bruno in the beginning, but it turns out to be a reporter. He says him and Jerry Bruno or the Secret Service, there was an argument about where JFK should go. He argued for, or Jerry Bruno argued for the Women's Trade Building. John Connolly argued for the trademark. And then Stuart B. McKinney asked if youths went to the Women's Building, would that have to take that turn down Dealey Plasma? And he goes, oh, no, we'd probably just would take Stemmons Freeway all the way there. That's what he says in his testimony, but the more I listen to Connolly, I don't think he's lying, but I think he was not wanting to go to Dallas. He was pressuring JFK with LBJ and others to go to Dallas, but he was also postponing certain times. It went way later than what they were expected. Kennedy was talking about August. Kennedy was talking about LBJ's birthday. This is based on Connolly's testimony. Um,
Yeah.
but I also think he was too obsessed with his election or whatever he had going on that he did not pay attention to any of the details of the trip besides of when it was going to happen because he literally said, he goes, I don't know, I had my people take care of it. And then great question was asked by Samuel Devine of the HSCA. He said, you knew the climate of Dallas, right? He goes, yeah. And Connolly's excuse for the motorcade or not wanting to do a motorcade was the fact that there's a wear and tear that goes on a president. We have to shake hands and go to all these places. And Samuel Devine says, you're worried about the wear and tear, but you weren't concerned about the fact that Adlai Stevenson had been attacked earlier. And then also General Walker had been shot about. And he was like, no, I wasn't expecting it. And he stutters for a minute and he doesn't know how to respond. It's because he didn't care about any safety precautions and things like that. And again, that's another area that gets into the argument at Love Field, which honestly, you can ask anybody for a source of where they heard it from. It's not what you think the fight was about Ralph Yarborough. I have four different testimonies, Malcolm Kilduff, LBJ, and John Connolly, all stating it was a fight about Yarborough being in LBJ's car or not wanting to ride with LBJ. I guess LBJ was being himself and nobody liked that.
Yeah.
Um, but again, this is something, like I said, this is for a long time when I first looked into the assassination was like, I thought it was, Kennedy arguing about Connolly with LBJ. They never had that discussion. Actually, Connolly's the one where it says, by God, he'll ride with him or he'll walk. That comes from Connolly when he met JFK at one of the hotel things and they asked about this feud that was going on. And Connolly only knew about it like it was that morning. He knew about it that night before.
Yeah.
Again, that's like conspiracy. Like everyone points, that's how you know LBJ was behind it.
Yeah, I don't buy now LBJ was close to Connolly, so you can argue that LBJ got into Connolly's ear to push for the trademark. I do think it's important to note, as you noted, that Connolly did not want a motorcade. So he was pushing for no motorcade and lunch at the trademark. And that's really important to understand. And again, I think people avoid this because they're like, then it just makes it seem so random, like there was no plot, right? But I think it's important. You have to put this stuff on the table. You have to understand it. I don't care where it points to. I don't care if it points to Oswald. If he did shoot Kennedy, which I don't believe he did, but if he did, I want him to be the guilt, I want him to be punished for that. So it's like, I think that is important to know. And I think Connolly wanted the trademark because it was a much nicer building, like the women's building. And he even said in his HSCA testimony, the women's building was an uglier building. And like, even though Bruno wanted it and the Secret Service wanted it, because it was an easier building to protect, which is why the Secret Service wanted it. And, which is, I think, another thing, another myth is that people say, the Secret Service as an institution was involved in the assassination, which I don't believe for a second, because if that was true, the head of the Secret Service would not have chosen the women's building. He would have chosen the trademark. He didn't. It was Connolly that pushed for the trademark. So he's the one that ultimately allowed for that fatal motorcade route to occur. Now, I don't think he did that intentionally for even 1 second. Like I said, like you said, he did not want a motorcade at all, Connolly. But we have to understand these things. Like, was it just, did somebody get into Connolly's ear, or was it just because Bruno initially mentioned some other places, but the Dallas Citizens Council, which was sponsoring the trip, was kind of like, no, we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like that. And then when he finally mentioned the women's building, they were like, okay. And so was it obvious that at that point that if you give Connolly an option between the trademark and the women's building, he's going to pick the trademark because the women's building is ugly? You know what I mean? And was it as simple as that? As it was just like, we're just going to say no to everything until he comes up with something ugly enough that we know Connolly's going to say no to, and then he'll be forced to speak at the trademark, which is basically what ended up happening. So it doesn't even have to be someone in his ear. It could just be that kind of simple type of manipulation, if that makes sense.
One of the main theories out there is that the Secret Service was behind the assassination, whether it was George Hickey firing off that rifle or whether it was Greer, the driver, turning around and pulling out a pistol. Both those are false. But it's
Yeah.
really when it comes to susceptibility in the case and what I've tried to look at, listen to the testimony of James Rowley and him defending his Secret Service and them just lighting him up. He was like, you had an armored car. And then he's like, yeah, the car was armored in ways like this. And he goes, yeah, but there was no top to the car. And he was kind of just like, yeah, but the car, it's heavy in weight, and that's why Greer couldn't speed up fast enough. And it's like, no, he hit the brakes twice to turn around and look at JFK. There was something where he was kind of being like, did any of your Secret Service act at all, respond? We're kind of surprised that it looks like Connolly's the only one reacting to a thing of gunfire. And think that was Sawyer of the HSCA. And Rowley's like, well, if you actually look at the camera, you see Clint Hill run and jump, and you see it in photographs. And they're like, is Clint Hill the only one that reacted to the thing? Like, you can't say that's your whole Secret Service. And he didn't know how to answer certain investigative procedures the Secret Service conducted in Dallas when it came to Oswald and Marina. But a lot of things get blamed on the Secret Service. And I think it's like what Vince says, action through inaction. They just weren't on their game. They weren't doing what they said that they were going to do. And next thing stuff. I mean, you can't really react fast enough to stop a bullet. But again, slowing down the car, stopping twice. But then people blame Roy Kellerman for not turning around. He didn't do anything. There was the bar back there, so he couldn't actually jump like how what's his name, Rufus Youngblood did to LBJ. But he didn't even do anything. He just let it all just unfolded, and then they all reacted afterwards.
The only Secret Service agent that I think might have been compromised is Emory Roberts, because he's the one that, when they were leaving Love Field, asked was a Secret Service agent running along JFK's car. He's the one that told that Secret Service agent to get off. He testified to the Warren Commission that in the car behind JFK, the Secret Service agents started to jump out, and he pulled them back because he told them they were never going to get to the car. He's the one that took them out drinking until 4 a.m. So there's a lot of, at least those three actions right there are suspicious in and of themselves. I don't really question the other Secret Service agents, other than they were incompetent or negligent, maybe to an extent. But I can't imagine anyone would agree to drive a vehicle that's going to have gunfire into it. Like that to me makes no sense. I don't think for one sec that the driver knew there was going to be gunfire. I think people have to remember these are human beings. As trained as they are, he hears some noises. He's trying to figure out what's going on. He's looking back to see what's happening, to see JFK. So I think it was just his human reaction to slow down and try to see it was the wrong reaction. He should have sped up. But it's really hard for me to believe someone would agree to be in the line of fire. Like that to me is a really hard sell. I think human fault and human error is more likely. But I do think Emory Roberts is very suspicious because he did pull the guy off the car. He did tell his agents not to run forward. He did take him drinking until 4 a.m. And he was actually very, very close to Lyndon Johnson. Like Lyndon Johnson later said, he's the first person who says hello to me in the morning and the last person that says good night to me in the morning. So that right there is an argument for LBJ perhaps having some kind of foreknowledge or having some kind of involvement in this assassination. I don't know who else Emory Roberts was close to, but I know he was very close to LBJ. But I don't think the Secret Service as an institution could have possibly been involved because I think their selection of the women's building negates that argument.
I think they're just they're incompetent is what I think. We have like Hoover influenced movies and made his FBI agents. There was a rule that the bad guys can shoot as much as they want, but they had to miss. When the FBI comes on screen, they have to look like badasses. He did that. So you
Yeah.
look at the Secret Service and how we view them in movies compared to what they actually do. I mean, most of them, from Malcolm Kilduff's statements, everybody in Washington, D.C. was basically getting drunk off $5 margaritas every day. He was like, that's the only way to get through that job. That's what he states in his oral history. And I think if you look at later LBJ phone calls, he's ringing out the Secret Service. I don't want them covering me. A bunch of 100 to 200 tin soldiers lined up with little guns about to fall over and a gun go off and get me killed. He said that 4 times over 2 years. He said that 4 times, that exact reference. I don't know what he was doing there, but again, he was not happy. He said, Hoover will take care of me. Hoover said he'll get his FBI agents to protect me better than any of these Secret Service. They can go back to counterfeiting. So I don't think it's I don't think it's a Secret Service plot. I just thought they're like in their 20s or 30s, whatever, and they're more worried about getting booze and getting drunk and doing things. I just think we had an unrealistic view. But again, people assume that means they're responsible, and it goes from there.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you. The only one I really question is Emory Roberts. I think he may have, I don't think we have proof that he did, but he made some questionable decisions. I think the rest, like you said, are incompetence, human error is kind of what it looks like to me.
What did you look at when it came to the Warren Commission? Because even when you're reading their interviews and transcripts, the number of people that they missed interviewing, or They really didn't do much. Let me just say that. They used the FBI and they used the Dallas Police Department. The FBI was kind of basing it off of what Hoover already kind of concluded to very shortly after Oswald was killed. So there's obviously, you look at this information, they're missing interviews with Knoll people. We have Mark Lane on video interviewing many witnesses about seeing smoke from the grassy knoll. That was really never investigated. They just kind of threw it at the end. So I'm curious what you thought about the Warren Commission reading their documentation.
Yeah, so they said on day one, or pretty much day one, that their goal was to settle the dust, which basically means to do away with the case. So I don't think they ever had any intention of a proper investigation. I think they were there for public opinion and public perception and to like calm the public and soothe them. And, they were like a PR firm, basically, like public relations essentially. And they just wanted to soothe the public in a way. I think that was their goal. And so I think they were selective in who they interviewed. I think they were selective in how they summarized the interviews. You know what I mean? And I think anything that pointed away from what their conclusion was that Oswald was behind it, I think they tried to avoid, or they tried to explain away like the magic bullet theory or, come up with explanations that are not very logical or convincing, but they had to find some way to explain certain events. And so I just think it was never a genuine investigation. Now there may have been some lawyers or some lower level people working for the commission that genuinely, were genuinely trying to get to the bottom of it. But at the end of the day, their conclusion was reached before they even started.
Bert Griffin on the HSCA testimony said that the Warren report was our fault. We didn't know how to properly articulate our words correctly when we made this report. Now, I don't believe everything Bert Griffin says, but when he's kind of being critical on the Warren Commission and he's talking about certain things, I'm hearing things like, yeah, you did leave it up. The Warren Commission did leave it up to the secondary team to really write the report, and they just kind of threw everything in the volumes. But you hear like someone like that who's involved in the committee understands that they might still agree with everyone always goes back to I agree Lee Harvey Oswald did it. There's never any difference on that opinion. But you have people like Connolly stating magic bullet. No, I was not hit with the same bullet that hit Kennedy. There's no way. He convinced John Sherman Cooper where his dissent comes in. He convinced Richard Russell. He convinced a bunch of people. And I have Richard Russell on phone calls talking about how could he hit two shots in the limo that missed the car completely? Didn't even hit the street. Like he's saying that to LBJ, and LBJ is like, what does it matter? He doesn't care. He's not involved in wanting to know what's going on. He just knows what he's got to report to the press when he's asked. So then you have Warren Commission members dissenting, which it's most of them, like John McCloy did later too. Hale Boggs, he had skepticism. He thought it'd been better if he would have did his own committee. He was talking to LBJ about that. That's why LBJ pulled him onto the Warren Commission. But there's a lot of people that always disagree on one little point, but then they have to agree with the final conclusion. Connolly stating magic bullet theory, kind of debunking that, but stating there's nothing different. The final conclusion is Lee Harvey Oswald. Malcolm Kilduff, never interviewed by the HSCA, never interviewed by the Warren Commission, thinks the magic bullet theory is nonsense, but agrees with the conclusion. It's weird, isn't it? How like in my opinion, someone gave a word out, like it had to be the conclusion is Oswald. Doesn't matter where you separate.
Yeah, I think people know intuitively that if they go against that, their career could be impacted, especially at that point. You know what I mean? Like if they speak out against it, like their career may not go in the direction that they want because I think people sense that this was a very top down thing, because the press ran with the lone nut story day one. It was just, I think they knew there was probably some shadiness with like, because even the whole when LBJ pressured everyone to go with the cover up, he was saying it was because Oswald was linked to the KGB and through Mexico City. And if we properly investigate this, there's going to be World War III and 40 million Americans are going to die. So I think people understood on some level. I don't think they understood who was behind it or why, but they understood there was something bigger going on here than Oswald. And if they pulled at that thread, that was going to lead to problems for them personally. And I don't think they necessarily even consciously thought about this. They just knew, like, I don't want to be the one person that speaks out and says, no, there's a conspiracy here. It was by obviously powerful people, because you're just going to get shot down. And I don't think anybody wanted to go there, which is sad, but it's sort of an indictment of how our system of power works in a way.
The same
A lot
reason
of groupthink, I think.
nobody wants a war to start, but also the same reason why nobody wants to be the one that loses the war. The reason of not pulling out of Vietnam sooner when they should have. Nobody wants to be that guy that loses the war. Again, this like when you're looking at the whole case in general, did you think you get more from reading the Warren Commission, or did you use more of like the HSCA? Because I always reference the HSCA's work. Surprisingly, people crap on their investigation, like, oh, yes, the budget, I get it. There's problems, sure. But they asked like really good questions, like stuff that we're still asking today about like the Secret Service, their response, and they're grilling the people that they're talking to. There are some members on the committee that were not happy with the way the rifle was. They were asking me, "You tell me the FBI shot the rifle or pistol how many times?" So then you really couldn't even get the proper test with it. They basically rendered it unusable, so you couldn't even trace the bullets to the tippet. They did that in the HSCA. That's a clip I have as well too on video. So it's interesting they proved that, and like that's not government officiated, or that's not like we're going the main official narrative line. So I have more faith in the HSCA's work, but also the Warren Commission. You read it, it's kind of like, are you saying conspiracy? I can't tell. It looks like you're saying conspiracy if I really read the volumes.
Yeah, if you read the interviews, it does read that way. And that's what I mean. Like when they did the summary, their summary didn't really fit their interviews. And nobody's going to read all those interviews, right? They're just going to read the summary. And they're not even going to read the summary. They're going to have NBC or ABC or CBS tell them what the summary said, right? So you've got several layers of like obfuscation before it gets into the public, right? Or before the average person hears about it. And so, but I thought it was all useful. The Warren Commission testimony, the initial police interviews, the HSCA testimony. I think any interviews with either the witnesses on the ground or anyone who was involved with trip planning, I think they was all helpful to an extent.
Where did you go next when you looked at like an examination of like evidence? Like if you're going to start looking at like the Texas School Book Depository being a possible shooting spot, or weapons or anything that could have been with Oswald. Like I said, even if it's Oswald that did it, but for me the evidence doesn't hold up. I mean, the Warren Commission used Marina Oswald, which I think sowed in the eyes of the American people that his wife says that's his gun. Obviously, he did it. That's where he works. But then there's the question: why is he shooting from his work? Why did he bother not to pick up the three casings that were on the ground? And then why did he not bother to hide his rifle? Did he want to get caught? Or did Marina know the difference between a rifle and a shotgun, which the HSCA proved she did not?
Yeah, and her testimony, I think it was like a 25 page or 30-page
It's like
report of like
6 hours.
inconsistent, yeah, inconsistent statements by Marina Oswald. So she just kept her like statements make no sense whatsoever. She's constantly contradicting herself. I think she's just trying not to get in trouble because people have to remember she's from the Soviet Union. She's not from America. She doesn't want to get kicked out. She's got two young children. She's just doing whatever the FBI or whoever's interviewing her tells her to do, basically. Um, and so, yeah, so after kind of trying to read through the interviews and stuff, I was trying to really focus on, I was trying to figure out like what pieces kind of changed the outcome, which is like Connolly pushing for the trademark. That changed the outcome. So I was trying to focus on those things because I was trying to avoid, because you could go down 10 million rabbit holes, right? So I was trying to find what are those things that actually changed the outcome, not so and so said this and that. I was trying to avoid all that he said, she said stuff as much as possible, which is difficult because you do have to listen to the on the ground witnesses, and it is important. Like witnesses are very important, but I was trying to avoid so and so said, this and that. I was trying to just say like, okay, well, if they spoke at the women's building, the assassination wouldn't have happened. If Emory Roberts had not pulled that agent off JFK's car, maybe JFK, the agent would have been there to protect him. He wouldn't have gotten his head blown off. Maybe there would have just got hit in the back. And so those are the kind of things that change the outcome. And so I was trying to find those things, whether it's Emory Roberts pulling off the agent, whether it's Connolly pushing for the trademark, the things that actually change the outcome, if that makes sense, is kind of where I tried to, yeah. So, that change, it didn't change the outcome in the sense that it happened, but it changed the outcome in the sense that it was never allowed to be investigated. Because of Ruby's actions, that crime, Oswald was never able to offer a defense. And people need to remember, if Oswald was alive, it would have gone through the court system. There would have been no Warren Commission, no cover up. It would have had to go through the court system because that's how someone gets tried in America when they are accused of a crime. And so, yeah, if Ruby had not shot Oswald, the cover up would have been a million times harder to achieve. And so that was one of those things that really did alter the outcome. And so those are the kind of things that I was trying to focus on, more so than like, did it point in this direction or that direction, but more so, did it change the outcome? Like, I was trying to figure out what things made the assassination possible
When we talk about
and the
Jack,
cover up possible.
when we talk about Jack Ruby shooting Oswald, what would have happened if Jack Ruby didn't shoot Oswald? Do you think Oswald would have been found not guilty? Obviously, with like the evidence and testimony and things later, a lot of stuff. The rifle was sent to like the FBI. It was gone. There's no chain of custody on it, so we don't know what happened. Magically, they get fingerprints. So it's like there's a lot of things that necessarily don't seem normal, or it seems normal for Dallas police, I should say. And I think there's a lot of testimony and statements to talk about the way that people interrogated, like Decker, Fritz, and others, that might have swayed a certain opinion or might have pulled something that might not have been real there. I think Lee Harvey Oswald's quoted as saying that I got me a cop and I got me a president too, or something along those stupid lines where people have testified saying he never said that. And then other people are saying that's what he said. So then there becomes a myth out there that this is, that only lays more guilt at his feet.
Yeah, I think if Oswald had not been killed, they would have tried to push a lawyer that was compromised on him. Sort of like when they did in the RFK case, they gave him lawyers that were appear to be likely compromised and not really working on Sirhan's behalf. So I think that's the first thing. They would have tried to manipulate him somehow to get attorneys that were not really on his side. Now, if he had been able to get genuine attorneys who were on his side, I think absolutely he would have been acquitted, because like you said, a lot of the evidence, like the palm print on the rifle, appeared like 4 or 5 days later. When they originally looked at the rifle, there were no prints on it at all. And they could have easily gotten it off any other, lifted it off any other materials of Oswald's that they had. So I think, and even the original rifle that they found was not the one that I think it was Weitzman claimed he found, right? He claimed he found a German Mauser and then suddenly it turned into, an Italian Manley Carcano. So I don't see, assuming he had good attorneys or fair attorneys that were actually working on his behalf, even if it was just a public defendant, but that was actually working on Oswald's behalf, I think he absolutely would have been acquitted. But I also think they would have tried to manipulate or give him attorneys that were compromised. Whether they would have been successful, like I think Oswald was a lot sharper than probably Sirhan. And maybe it would have been harder to get bad attorneys for Oswald, but I think they would have tried. Or they would have just tried killing him again. That's probably what they would have done. But
Do you think that was an inside conspiracy to get Jack Ruby to kill Oswald? Not so much low level, high level. Do you think it was like a CIA, FBI? A lot of people that go by that was the main orchestrators tend to go there. In my opinion, I thought it was just Dallas police. They let him in. I think Seth Canner's testimony really supports that point. A lot of people saw him there. And then I even think the HSCA concluded that it was Patrick Dean that let Ruby in through a side door. That's what Lieutenant Jack Revel said. And then a couple others also supported that opinion and viewpoint. I think it was Don Fouché said that as well too.
yeah, I tend to think it was higher level. So Garrison, during his investigation, got Ferry's phone records, and he determined that Ferry had called Lawrence Myers in Chicago. And Lawrence Myers then went down to visit Ruby the night before the assassination. And the two of them met at the Cabana Hotel. And there was another guy, Jim Braden, that was staying at that hotel, although we don't know if he met up with the two of them. He ended up getting arrested in the Dow Tex building right after JFK's assassination, although the police let him go shortly after.
He was also at RFK's assassination as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't know he was
Yeah,
there.
Jim Braden was at JFK and RFK's. Yeah, he was at the Ambassador Hotel. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, no, that is interesting. But sorry, yeah. So Ruby met up with Myers, and then Ruby also had Sam Bloom's contact info at his apartment. And Bloom was the head of the host committee, so he was responsible for the luncheon arrangements, and he was kind of looking over all the trip arrangements in Dallas. And I view him as a very suspicious character. But he was trying to make Oswald available to the press. He was a PR guy. That's why he wanted to make Oswald available to the press, because he's like runs, I think, the top PR agency in Dallas. But Ruby had his contact info in his apartments that the FBI found. So was it, so I speculate, was he trying to contact Bloom to figure out when he was going to make Oswald available to the press, because he killed Oswald in front of like 40 or 50 reporters. And there may have been a few in the police that were compromised as well that kind of let him in. But I tend to think that because he's got, and Myers was his cover guy to the Warren Commission as well. He told the Warren Commission that Ruby worshiped JFK, and he was just so distraught that weekend. And, every time he talked to him, he was just distraught over JFK being killed. Just complete load of crock, right? Ruby's not sitting there crying over JFK. But this is the story that Lawrence Myers told the Warren Commission. So he's obviously in on it. Like, there's no doubt in my mind. He's got connections to Ferry, to Ruby. He's Ruby's cover guy. And so I think definitely, Ruby it was obviously whoever plotted it had Ruby in mind as a fallback guy to get rid of Oswald. That's what it looks like to me.
What do you think about Ruby's personality? Do you believe any of the spur of insanity stuff that came out during his trial? Do you believe he was really caring about the president and that he cried for Jackie Kennedy, as the Warren Commission or whatever says that his motive was, or, patriotic indignation? Or do you think he was a street brawler, tough guy? There's a lot I learned about Ruby digging through like Earl Ruby's testimony and just listening to a lot of stuff. Like, you always see in any document that mentions Ruby, there's the Colonial Club and there's the Carousel Club. And there's like the Silver or whatever. I don't know what that one is. It gets mentioned as another one. I was like, does he own multiple clubs or is it just the one club? Like, and it turns out the Colonial Club is the Carousel Club. Earl Ruby gave him $50,000 to rebrand it, or 5,000, something with five and a bunch of zeros. But he
Yeah.
gave it to rebrand it, and that's when it became the Carousel Club. So a lot of people that are mistaking, like, couldn't be the same Ruby because he owned the Colonial Club, not the Carousel Club. And it's like, no, it's the same guy. It's just he switched the whole branding of his club and changed his name to Jack Ruby instead of Rubenstein, which he was going off of.
Yeah, I don't believe a word Ruby says.
Oh,
I
come
just
on.
think
He's
he's full
kissing
of it.
puppies in photos. You don't believe that? I love that photo.
He changed his story. He gave so many like reasons for why he did it, and he kept changing his story. And I don't believe a
I
word that
believe he
comes
was
out of his
nuts
mouth.
for sure. Like, but I didn't know he was missing like an index finger, the tip of it, like all that type
Oh,
of
I
stuff.
didn't.
Yeah, if you look at his
Yeah.
photos, he's got his hands. The one shorter, I think it's on his left hand. It's missing the top, like where the fingernail is. It's missing that whole part. He said he got bit off in a
Okay.
bar fight. But I was just like, you're seeing more about Ruby, where I'm trying to figure out what's going on with the guy, and you're trying to learn more about, like, I don't know, where does he fit into this whole piece besides wrapping it up. But obviously police connections and a lot of other things that kind of highlighted more about Dallas and the climate as well too. Just where everything was happening, evidence manipulation seems a little bit more plausible now. But cover-ups, it's everywhere. Like, people always mention the assassination, there's prime evidence, there's a conspiracy. I go, there's not really evidence on the assassination, there's more evidence on the cover-up. I keep seeing that every single where I go, and everyone that points at that's evidence of the assassination, like a conspiracy, you're really just pointing up to the cover up, because people not wanting to investigate certain things, certain leads not being pursued, phone calls of it has to be Oswald. All these things end up going back to just covering it up, pushing it away. We've got it. Just dust it, get it out the door.
Yeah, I kind of view it as three different things. There's the assassination itself, there's the cover up, and then there's the narrative. And I think people merge the three together in their minds all the time. They think because someone participated in a cover up, they were involved in the assassination, or because someone's pushing a certain narrative, they were involved in the assassination. And I don't really see it that way. I see there's the assassination. There was a decision that it's going to be covered up, and that's driven starters by LBJ, really, because he's the new president. If he wanted a proper investigation, he could have pursued one. Him and Hoover, the minute it happened, they were all over the cover up. Really everybody in the establishment, the media was on the cover up the second it happened. It was like I think they understood on some level that this was done by, this, or there was at least a possibility that this was done by very powerful forces, and they better not go into it because, they don't want to rock the boat and find out what's lying underneath that boat. So I think a lot of people like Katzenbach and all these people, they knew, like intuitively knew from the get-go, this thing needs to be covered up because we don't even want to know what the hell happened. Like, we just need to cover this up because whatever it is, it's bad. It's going to make America look bad. It's going to make us look like a banana republic, whatever it is. We just need to cover it up. So I think that's the second stage. And I don't think those are necessarily the same people involved in the assassination. They may be, but they may not be. I don't think you can make the assumption that they are. And then there's the narrative, the public perception, of like, how are we going to soothe the public? How are we going to calm the public? How are we going to, make it look like there's continuity and we don't want like a revolution, or we don't want people angry in the streets. And like, so then there was like, what's the narrative? Oh, okay, it was, Oswald was whatever. I mean, they never even gave a motive for Oswald, which was kind of weird. But there was that soothing the public aspect of it. And again, I don't think those people were necessarily the same people actively doing the cover up, and not necessarily the same people actively doing the assassination. But they also played a part in JFK never getting justice. So, in terms of JFK never getting justice, I blame all three parties equally. They're all like, it doesn't matter who did it. If you participated in the cover up or if you pushed a certain narrative, you're equally guilty in my mind, because you prevented this man from getting justice. And I think that's a horrible, horrible thing to do. But I don't think it's necessarily the same people. I don't make the assumption that it's the same people, if that makes sense.
I have a different perspective on Katzenbach. I definitely think he was supporting the official narrative, being part of that, though, just because he had to. Like many people felt like they probably had to stop from us from maybe attacking another country or any type of other violence. But hearing his testimony about RFK, like people forget that they were closer, not JFK and Katzenbach. It was RFK and Katzenbach. And just hearing him give like the most honest testimony about RFK and what their brother relationship was with JFK was like it. That was like where I felt it. It was honesty. That was something like I don't think you could just randomly lie about that. And then he gave a true statement about Hoover too that was not good at all. Very much like Hoover was jealous that RFK and JFK were so close. He never was second to anybody when it came to the president. So that was something that really kind of changed my opinion on his involvement in the assassination. But again, it's those things you hear later where you wish you would have heard it then, or you would have had someone speak up about it then. Again, always leading to the conclusion of Oswald. I believe 100% cover up in a lot of this aspect of things. But I guess I want to ask you because you mentioned you said another name after Katzenbach. I'm blanking on it now. Ah,
Hoover,
no. Oh, it's someone else in the assassination.
LBJ. I know I
No,
mentioned him.
no. All right, skip over it. Don't worry about it. I blanked on it. I had it for a second. I pulled the thread and it just went out the door. Um,
I do agree with you on Katzenbach, though. I do put a lot of blame on the people who did the cover up because they prevented justice, but I do think some of them did it from genuine intentions. Like I don't think Katzenbach necessarily did that because he hated JFK or because, I think a lot of people did genuinely believe that there was something really dark to uncover, whether it be war with Soviet Union or whatever it may be, that it was just going to completely tear the fabric of the establishment. And they were like, you know what? It's just better to cover it up than to let this can of worms open, because it could get really ugly if we let this can of worms open. And so I don't think it was always like because of hatred of JFK or anything like that. But at the end of the day, like to me, justice is what matters. They should have let that can of worms open. They should have properly investigated it. Like, even if their intentions were good, I still blame them for ultimately, I think if you don't have truth and justice, you don't really have anything. And so I think they still should have done proper investigation.
I remember it now. The unpopular opinion I share with Craig Ciccone, who did the Dealey Plaza witness map. I blame everyone for some part of involvement or not doing something. Hoover definitely, for sure, the cover up aspect and everything had to just be Oswald eliminating conspiracy completely ruined the investigation, and the Warren Commission was just parroting that and using their evidence and the Dallas police evidence. But again, Hoover didn't want to give testimony to the Warren Commission. He was forced to by LBJ. Then he leaked his own testimony of the Warren Commission that LBJ was going to have locked for 75 years or so to his me and Paul Abbott have been talking about him, and I don't think anybody's done work on him. Jeremiah O'Leary for the Washington Star. He was part of Operation Mockingbird. Like he's a definite Hoover spy asset in the media to leak things into the press. And it's Ramsey Clark. No, it's Meyer Feldman and LBJ on the phone talking about how did Hoover's testimony get leaked to the Washington Star? He goes, we think Jeremiah Leary published it. Well, how did he get it? We think Hoover leaked his own testimony. And that's just Hoover to be pissed off that you're making him give testimony when he doesn't want to believe. He doesn't believe in the Warren Commission anyway. And so you have something like that. And then you have many other people, like I would say the Kennedy family is also at fault for some of these things as well, too. Locking information down in the archives limited to certain researchers. Did RFK take JFK's brain? I have no clue, but we have a lot of autopsy materials that are missing that would help us define this a little bit harder. If he was going to open up his own investigation, I believe that, but he's not around. He got killed too. So again, we're in this situation where a lot of information, a lot of stuff is missing to this puzzle piece. In over 60 something years, it's been. So everyone, if they're agreeing with the official narrative, if they're saying there's no evidence of a conspiracy, Blakey yelling at Nigel Turner about his documentary, and then I speak to him on here and he's telling me I think the CIA lied to me, you're starting to change your tune. But if you're saying that there is no evidence of anything else, or if there's nothing but Oswald, you're covering it up, in my opinion, because there's plenty of evidence to support that there's a lot of other leads and information that we might never know. But it's not just like Doug Horn said. In what world in a lone nut kills the president does the autopsy change 4 times in 2 weeks? That doesn't happen. He doesn't have control of that. There's so much other stuff that gets pointed out. It's very simple for people to look at and go, that actually, yeah, why does that happen? I have no clue.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think everybody who pushed the lone nut thesis is, and there's a lot of people, including members of the Kennedy family, share some of the blame for JFK never getting justice. I hate to say that, but it's just the way it is. Like if you're, if someone, I don't know, I get like I think groupthink is very powerful and people want to fit in and they want to go with the media narratives and they want to go with the popular narratives, and I get that, but I don't know. To me, it's like truth and justice is all that matters. Like you should want justice for this man because otherwise you live in a fake society. You know what I mean? Like if we live in a society where the president can just be violently removed by special interests or narrow interests, then what are we even voting for? You know what I mean? We're voting for someone that can be vetoed by other interests, and then we do nothing about it if they decide to veto that vote, which is basically what happened. People voted for the JFK, it got vetoed, and nothing was done about it. And so, to me, it's almost weird that people just kept voting. Like to me, it's like you clearly don't live in a democracy. You know what I mean? When you allow something like that to happen and then you decide you're not going to investigate it at all, and that you just feed people things like the magic bullet theory, to me, that's not a democracy. You know what I mean? And it's just, but people just went along with it. A lot of people went along with it. And that's really sad for me, I think.
I would even go as far as to extend it to RFK Jr. or not RFK Jr., JFK Jr. or the grandson or whoever.
Oh
Still,
yeah, not no
what it,
JFK Jr. was awesome, but
the,
the grandson,
yeah, not
yeah, I don't
not
know
the
what happened
airplane
there.
son. I'm talking about the grandson that's going out there like,
Yeah,
why are
yeah.
people investigating conspiracy? I'm like, dude, out of all the things that have been admitted and have changed from the official narrative, I mean, we've had the HSCA, Dr. Humes, and a Assassination Records Review Board exposed that he was like 4 inches off the head wound or whatever it was, or the hole in the back. There's so much that has completely changed and went to a different direction where I would think that you would just not even hesitate on saying, yeah, there's obviously something else more going on. It can still be Oswald. No one's saying it can't. If you want to defend him, that's fine too. There's evidence to say it couldn't be him, sure. But you really examine the facts and what is verifiably everyone's admitted to as this has happened. It's the brain missing. It's the other things that there's no way that Oswald would have had access to or would have been able even to get a hold of. So it's like you look at these, you point these out to people, and hopefully they agree. But I mean, do you talking about it and learning more about it, or did you find yourself getting addicted to the whole? I'm not into true crime either, but it's freaking hard not to look at all this and see like all these weird lines that get drawn to lines that get drawn to lines. And I find it interesting now just to make clips of audio and try and see who said what when they said what, because it helps me understand it a little bit better. And I think it helps people have a source of where that information comes. It's just an opinion, of course, but it's something that is out there that you Google things now on the internet says Lee Harvey Oswald didn't like JFK for certain policies. I have never heard Oswald say that in my entire life. Actually, I've heard the opposite. I've heard he said he likes JFK based on Marina's testimony, but Google won't show you that. So when you hit videos now, at least you see some of my clips, you see other things that pop up, interesting things about the Warren Commission. I think even history.com has like 9 things the Warren Commission didn't know, which was the CIA and FBI withholding information from them. Um, these types of things where I'm like, at least there's like a not a balance, but there's not nothing on the internet where you can still have something to go to for a resource or just an opinion.
Yeah, I did not enjoy studying the assassination at all because I don't like crime and I don't want to think about people plotting the death of someone I admire. So it was not enjoyable for me. It was more like I just really, really want justice for JFK. Like with all my heart, I want to see him get justice one day. And I think that's needed really for America to heal. So it's not just for him, it's for Americans as a whole. And that's why I decided to study it, but I don't actually enjoy it at all. I almost felt like after writing the book that I needed to like cleanse myself or something. Like I just needed to get all this stuff, like you know what I mean? It was just this like darkness, and I just wanted to get rid of it and be done with it. So I understand the family maybe not wanting to look at the details or whatnot because it is difficult, it is dark, it is not fun. But I am very disappointed in JFK's grandson because at the end of the day, if you care about your grandfather, you should want justice for him and you should take the time to actually really investigate this thing. Like read the firsthand material, read the witness statements. Don't just take what CNN or NBC or New York Times, which are all like propaganda outlets, don't just take at face value what they say. Actually research it, actually study his policies, look at what policies changed as a result of his assassination, because we lost so much when he was assassinated. There were so many policies that changed that are never spoken about, because very few people actually understand JFK's policies. And I think it's heartbreaking that his own grandson doesn't really want justice for him. I think that's really heartbreaking to see, but it is what it is. But luckily, there are still a lot of Americans and people globally that do want to see JFK get justice and do, you know, want to do right by him, really. And so I hope that my book contributes, a small step in that path. And I think a lot of other people have contributed, along that path as well. And I think we just have to, keep doing that as best we can.
I'm gonna play one clip for you. I don't have to play anymore after this, but I discovered this, and I'm sure people might have already known about it. So Alan Dulles and RFK were on the phone, and he makes a Bay of Pigs comment, and I thought like I've never heard it before. And it just is a little aside. They're talking about Mississippi and the issue that's going on there, and RFK wants him to investigate Mississippi. And they get into this whole. I'll play it.
Even you see, even if that's not true, the fact that you could report that, or I mean that you found it, just if President Johnson has to take some steps later on, and these things have such an effect across the country. It's not just Mississippi, but just have an effect across the country. I mean, this is not just a local.
Why did you pick me for this?
Because I know you.
I've been a little mad at you, a little bit on this Bay of Pigs book, but I forget that very easily.
Oh, well, I'm glad. But anyway,
I don't stay angry long.
Yeah, well, fine. But I think it could be, and I think the president feels it could be a big help.
Well, I'd do anything for the nation,
Yeah.
any time. I've never refused. I just have a little question of my...
Well, I'm sure you could do it.
Wise thing to do.
Wait,
He wants one out this night? The president wants one out?
Yeah, I think he'd like to do if it works out with Governor Johnson. Here he is back again.
Yeah.
And then LBJ hops on the phone and they get into a discussion. They're trying to get John Finney on the Warren Commission. He was asking him about him, said he's a good worker, work with Clark Clifford or something like that. But I've never heard that Bay of Pigs comment from anything. Like I've never seen anybody on the internet talk about that or do anything about that. And I heard that in the phone call because I like listening to the LBJ library. I'll go through and it's helped me develop more of I don't consider as much as JFK people do the hatred towards LBJ. I think he was blunt, but I also agree with Malcolm Kilduff where he said that the one thing the Kennedy administration missed out on was utilizing the abilities of President Johnson to get things done. And then he also mentioned something that I think we've all talked about not being a part of the boys club Kennedy was. Kilduff states that. He said Kennedy never went to these people's meetings and never sat down and had bourbon with them like LBJ did when he sat on the Hill and had bourbon with these guys. LBJ used every tactic in the book, whether he was your friend, whether he'd intimidate you. And again, I agree with John McCone on this, which is LBJ was not a good president, but he was a damn hell of a good politician. And I think that's kind of what we look at. And again, a lot of people hate LBJ for the civil rights stuff, thinking he's taking it from Kennedy. I don't see that. I sadly, I think you needed someone like LBJ to get those things passed at that time. Just the way he was talking to people, the way he was getting stuff done. I mean, he reminds me of a Hoover type where he's got information on people if he wants to use it. He butchered, or not butchered, but he bullied Earl Warren to even get on the Warren Commission. Earl Warren said no to RFK, then said no to LBJ twice. There's a phone call where he's talking to Richard Russell about it, and then there's also a phone call where he's talking to Abe Fortas about it. And Earl Warren apparently said was balling in his office, and he's like, "You're going to serve on this commission. You're going to do it for your nation if you ain't going to do it for me." And again, people use Richard Russell as a great example of a dissenter from the Warren Commission. Look at that guy on Face the Nation. You'll have a different opinion on him. He's saying we need to send more troops to Vietnam, people who fought in 2 wars, next to people that they went to high school with that haven't fought in 1. It's your American duty. I'm an equal opportunity person. I believe everyone should do what they have to do for their country. We should be sending more, and we're spending this $1 billion a month or something like that. Makes you change your perspective when you take them into a different context, whether it's a different administration. And for LBJ, I'm not saying he's a good guy at all. But I just think when you're looking at a lot of things, I think a lot of things that get pushed to blame, some of that stuff could rise of Manchester's book. I mean, how many people read that thing and slammed him and all those things about him and Jackie, or even I think Jackie got upset with it too. But there was a lot of stuff in there that I have not found anything before. Did Berkeley state these things that Manchester said? We don't know because his tapes are still locked up. So again, there's these things that come out of a root of a book, or they come out of something that's not factual, and you end up hearing it in the community that I had to relearn that maybe wasn't accurate. Like a lot of people have all these myths about LBJ, and look, he's a Texas guy. I mean, his idea of inviting people into the home and being friendly with the reporters are from DC, New York, did not like that at all. Him going on a drive and drinking a beer while he's driving, that's not presidential. That's not what the reporter's going to run right to the Baltimore Sun. I think it was Helen Dobbins that did that and wrote a whole story about LBJ. So again, I'm not saying covering for him. I'm apologizing for LBJ. I've just learned from the other side, LBJ historians and other people that are in Texas that are just history people in general, that have kind of gave me a more balance on that aspect of things. And again, he had his faults too. I think everyone does. But it changed the assassination for me, I guess, because a lot of people stick with that. If you're only in the JFK room, all you hear is the horrible nature of LBJ. And I find it difficult. I listened to phone calls with him and RFK. I'm sure they didn't like each other. They made some comments without each other being in the room about each other before. I think even Bobby was putting press stories out about LBJ for his whole thing. I get the feud, but again, it's different. There's times where they shared pretty good conversation that I've heard. Maybe they were doing it because it was recording. People always bring up that point. But again, I find it super, super difficult to say this guy orchestrated the whole damn thing. I was like, he definitely benefited. A lot of people did. But I think it was something else.
Yeah, so I know Jackie said in her oral history that JFK thought LBJ was totally incompetent.
It's true.
And he didn't think that when he first started working with him. He kind of realized that after he became president over time, because he kept trying to give stuff to LBJ and LBJ never got anything done. So he kind of realized over time, that LBJ was very incompetent. So I did not see evidence to support I think it's just, I don't personally believe LBJ masterminded it. I think he definitely was in charge of the cover
Yeah,
up, or
he found
played a
out
vital
about it.
role in the cover up.
He found out
Yeah,
about it.
and he may have played a role, because he did have a lot of connections in Dallas, and he was close to Emory Roberts, and so I don't rule out him playing a part in the assassination itself, and he certainly played a part in the cover up. But yeah, and JK himself thought LBJ was incompetent, and this was far too sophisticated for someone like LBJ to mastermind, in my opinion.
I like listening to his phone calls where he's like screaming at Bill Moore, "I'm not anti-Kennedy. I never said a damn thing wrong about the Kennedys." And he's like going off on this whole tirade and stuff like that. I'm like, yeah, I like, again, I think what's interesting is Manchester's tapes. There's a lot of stuff I feel like would fill in some holes. Again, it's writing a book though. Did he glorify it up and do it to make it more enticing. I don't know.
Yeah.
I hear stuff about RFK and his press connections and stuff like that, and it seems like something, RFK definitely talking to Dulles right there. He that definitely did not want to be on the phone with that guy. You can sense that in the conversation aspect of things. So I think, it's been illuminating for me to look at tapes and phone calls and all this type of stuff. I'm happy that, you're able to use some of the oral history stuff you learned about like Jackie Kennedy and stuff like that, because that also adds in a perspective, but also like that you don't draw a final point on this is the person. I think we got enough of those out there, but I
Yeah,
guess
I agree.
what was one thing for you that you felt like just you didn't want to touch about the case, the assassination part, not the exact conclusion part, but just like a certain like the Tippit thing, any of the other kind of weird things that happened, like the blood on the grassy, no, yeah, the blood on the knoll type thing.
I didn't get into the autopsy much, like other than I said, the autopsy was a sham and stuff like that. But I shouldn't say the autopsy. I didn't get into the medical evidence too much because I'm not a doctor. So I just didn't feel qualified to really analyze the medical evidence other than I talk about the things like the big hole in the back of the head and the sham autopsy and all that, but not like not in a very medical way. Some books really get into the medical evidence, and that's just something I didn't even really try because I just don't feel like I'm qualified to do that.
Show me where the occipital protuberance is. Spell
Yeah,
it. That's what I tell
that's
people.
me.
Is like spell it. They always say it's this one thing. I'm like spell it, dude, without autocorrect. It's there's a medical terminology. Again, I think when people start explaining stuff and they start talking about how this happens, I think it's how they got away with neutron activation analysis. You can listen to the whole HSCA. They proved, or the Floyd 15 asked him. He's like, "You tell me the FBI that was the first time they ever used neutron activation analysis?" He goes, "Yeah," and he goes, "Our methods are a lot better now to say that they might have accidentally got the correct answer." And it's kind of like Floyd 15's like, really? Like, how good is it now? Like, if I could do this, and he's like, oh, we can't do that. It has to be like a specific. And he goes, oh, so the evidence gets better as time goes on. Doesn't the radiation of it just fade off of it? And it's like, you hear this stuff and it's like, okay, let's toss out the whole, you know, all this. We even have Hoover on tape saying you can't use lie detector tests. It just boosts the evidence you already have. So it's like you get into this point where it's like, all right, so none of the forensics that everyone keeps mentioning is you have to look at the forensics. Well, if you say Zapruder film's altered, you say the X-rays are altered, you say everything's altered, then what the hell do I use? I got to use eyewitness testimony. I got 100 something people saying they saw smoke or they ran towards the grassy knoll. I'm gonna trust those 100 people. But I'm just saying that again, there's a lot of conflicts in the case and it gets difficult, but I'm happy you did it. I would stay off the research boards just as a word of advice. Just don't even. It's not fun. But there's a lot of people with strong opinions, obviously, in the case. And like I said, I don't know. I'm trying to just document and whatever somebody said, they said. I don't know. It doesn't have to be true. But I appreciate you giving me the time to be able to talk on my show about this. I was super excited, as you can tell, because I was waiting for you to hop in. I told you if you hopped in the game, it would be a lot of fun. But thank you, Monica, for giving me the time. Is there a place or any ending remarks you'd like to say to anyone out there listening who might be looking into the case, and also where people can find your books?
So my books are on Amazon, Thrift Books, Barnes and Noble, all the usual outlets. I also set up a Twitter account maybe like 6 or 8 months ago where I just post little quotes of JFK and stuff. And I felt like like I said, I kind of felt like I had to cleanse myself after this book. And so I wanted to put the focus back on JFK and all the wonderful things he did, because I think that gets lost when people talk about the assassination. It gets lost, like everything he accomplished, everything he was trying to accomplish. And so I wanted to sort of put the focus back on him. And so that's kind of what I did with that Twitter account, is I can just post like quotes of him every day and whatnot, hopefully inspirational quotes, because that's what got me into this in the first place.
Well, Monica, I appreciate the time again. Love having you back on. We'll have to do another one on Michael Jackson because I've been kind of listening back to our other ones and I got some more questions. But I appreciate the time and thank you so much for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for our next